What do you do when the only thing left of someone you loved is a horse they left behind? She asked the question to the wind because the hills would not answer. Frost cracked under her boots like old paper. The air tasted of peat and iron and something that felt dangerously like memory. Her breath came out in small ghosts. The handheld GPS in her palm blinked a blue pulse, a dot with no name, coordinates but no owner. It had sounded like a small, impossible mistake, a single soft ping between the map tiles. She stayed still until the sound faded like someone waiting for a voice that never comes. She had not planned to be here. She had planned errands, small rooms, the polite avoidance of weekends. The mountains had not been on any list. Grief, though, does not keep to plans. It burrows. It reroutes. The hill called in the particular pitch that made her stomach drop. The same pitch that her sister used to use when asking about tea, when she needed small comforts to stay afloat. The memory cut like a stone. She folded it away in the hollow of her ribs and kept walking. The light was thin, the kind the highlands keep like an unpaid debt. The trail was a scar across moss and rock. Sheep watched indifferent, as if they had been rehearsing for stoicism their whole lives. The horse came into the world on the other side of a rise, first in sound, the clack of hooves on heather a deep rusty percussion. Then in shape, as if someone had sketched a shadow against the sky and breathed life into it. It was not a stray pony. It was too deliberate, too careful in its patience. She saw the animal before the animal saw her. A chestnut flank, a mane like the edge of a flame in cold light, coat dusted with frost. The horse's breath made little clouds that folded and broke apart. Its ears turned like silent hands to the wind and then to her. For a long moment they simply regarded one another. Two small, nervous creatures trying to decide if the other belonged in their day. She had come to the hills to lose herself, to punish the parts of her that still expected ordinary kindness. Instead, she found a creature that seemed to have slipped out of a story she had been told as a child, a story that always finished with a return to warmth. The horse's eye held a depth she recognized. Not human depth, not sorrow like hers, but a plain animal intelligence that read hunger and cold and habit. It nudged a bit of frozen grass into its mouth and chewed, blinked, and then watched her again. She slowed. Her hands were small, stupid things, clenched, then opened as if by accident. She had been taught how to approach a horse once, decades ago, at a summer fair. Keep low, breath soft, hand out on its shoulder. The rules felt irrelevant when everything that taught her those rules had been folded up in someone else's life. She moved anyway, one foot after the other, like someone drawing a map with her steps. The first contact was a noise that was not a sound at all, but a pressure. The horse shifted its weight and exhaled in a long, slow line of steam. A moth of hay-scented air hit her face and she forgot to breathe properly. Its nose was a soft, wet stone against the fabric of her sleeve when it came close enough to investigate. She expected the horse to shy away at any moment. Instead, it lingered, whiskers brushing her skin, nostrils flaring to read the human story written in her scent. It was a small, humiliating intimacy. A stranger reading her like a letter. She remembered how her brother used to laugh when she cried about small things. He said she cried like someone who kept too many maps in their pockets, always lost but forever prepared. Now she had no maps and the weather was not on her side. The horse pushed its head a fraction closer, softening its muzzle against the heel of her hand. It did not try to dominate. It did not startle or fret. It simply rested there as if it had been waiting for this precise, tender interruption. The GPS in her pocket pulsed again, one soft blue blink. She fished it out, hands suddenly clumsy with the weight of wanting. The device showed a point, a set of coordinates where no owner was named, just an anonymous signal drifting like a message in a bottle. She watched the numbers for a moment, latitude, longitude, and felt the absurd comfort of certainty. That small rectangular gadget told her the horse existed in terms the world would accept, and yet it refused to tell her why. The horse tuned to the beep as if it heard a private music only it could interpret. It flicked its ears, nostrils flared. For a small, sharp second, she thought she saw recognition, not of her, but of something that belonged to a history she hadn't been privy to. The animal looked toward the lower glen where a line of ruined fence posts stood like old teeth. The glen had been empty when she passed it, an absence that had felt like many things. Neglect, time, the slow failure of care. She thought about leaving. That had been the plan since the grief hardened into a protocol. Leave before the longing could set roots. But the horse's flank rose and fell beside her. Patient, unassuming company that required nothing from her but the small miracle of presence. When she shifted her weight, the horse shifted. When she took a step, it adjusted without panic. It was not following her yet, and she hoped it would not. That hope felt like a brittle demand. Small acts mattered. The horse let her touch the soft triangle under its chin. It closed one eye, then the other, as if in slow approval. When she spoke, nothing important, just a thread of a sentence about the weather. It perked its ears in the exact rhythm of listening, as if the animal could choose which human histories to attend to. It was a practical kindness, alive, immediate, unshowy. It moved the shape of the world under her feet in a way no conversation could. She learned its breathing. She learned the little blink that meant caution and the slow droop that meant comfort. She watched the way its lips worked around a tuft of grass, the exact manner an older horse had of rolling its upper lip when deciding if a bite was worth the effort. These were the honest gestures that made it real. They were not metaphors. They were facts she could hold. The sky darkened as if someone had folded a book closed. A wind picked up from the north and pressed cold fingers through the layers at her neck. She pulled her jacket tighter and felt the animal's warmth at her side like an unspoken offering. The hill felt suddenly too small to contain both their histories. She thought of the person she had lost, the small particular habits, the way they twirled their keys, the way they hummed to make tea faster, and a hot private ache rose behind her sternum. There was a sentence she had not finished with them, a last ordinary thing she had not said. The horse shifted, placed its head against her shoulder in a manner that was not indulgent, but necessary. Its breath was warm, scented faintly with hay and cold. The contact was simple and catastrophic. Her knees betrayed her. She did not plan to kneel, but the earth found her and she folded into it like something returning late to its own bed. Something about the motion, the weight against her, the steady heart under muscle, made the past appear less like a wound and more like a map with one crucial corner missing. She wanted to ask the horse everything. Who did you belong to? Where did you come from? Did you keep their laughter in your mane? But the question stayed lodged in her throat like a stone. When she finally rose, the horse turned its head and looked at the GPS in her hand. It regarded the little blinking device with a seriousness that suggested the two belonged to different, but overlapping languages. The blue dot did not answer. The horse did not move as if waiting for permission. It moved as if deciding. She made the smallest, most reckless choice she could imagine. She took a step toward the ridge she had just come over, and then another, testing. The horse did not follow immediately. It watched her with an expression that could have been caution or calculation, or the quiet courtesy of another living thing granting someone agency. She reached the crest and paused to look back. For a breath, the horse stood perfectly still, the silhouette against the shallow sky like a punctuation mark. Then, as if pulled by some thread she could not see, it stepped after her. She did not know why her heart leapt like a bird. She did not know why the GPS would show a horse with no owner. She did not know whether following would be salvation or some new, tender kind of trouble. She only knew that when she turned to go down the other side of the ridge, the animal fell into step beside her. Close, steady, and inexplicably chosen. She walked on, and with every step a question grew louder than the wind. Who had left this horse behind, and what had it been waiting to tell her? They began to move together like two sentences finishing the same thought. Days layered in a slow, quiet way. Morning light that smelled of burnt toast. Rain that smudged the world into watercolor. Nights when the moon hung like a bruise. She kept the GPS on her wrist now, not because she trusted technology to tell stories, but because the little blue dot was a kind of promise. The horse could be found again, and so could she if she followed the right coordinates. The odd things started small and then became insistently precise. The horse would stop at a particular bend in the path where a single hawthorn grew, and stand stock still, nostrils flaring toward the cracked earth. It would refuse to cross a shallow stream until she crouched and whispered nonsense into the water, and then it would step over with all the dignity of someone admitting defeat. Once, on a morning so bright her skin ached, it dropped its head and pawed the ground 3 times in exact rhythm, then walked away as if a promise had been made and kept. She noticed how it reacted to sound. A child's laugh set its ears forward, soft and curious. A distant motor sent it into rigid alertness. But certain noises, a long, low hum she had heard once when she sorted through boxes, the sound of a kettle that whistled like a sigh, seemed to steady it, the way a name steadies a hand. When she hummed that same small tune while tacking the saddle, the animal's neck softened. It leaned into the rhythm as if remembering a long-ago cadence. She fought the pull of meaning the way one tugs weeds, careful, deliberate, telling herself this was coincidence. She had learned to distrust patterns. Patterns had been how she let people go. The horse, though, made patterns of its own, gentle and determined. It would nudge her shoulder when she hesitated at a gate. It would pick a path through bracken that always led to somewhere warmer. In the small, corroded ways of ordinary life, it remapped the borders of her day until those borders were friendlier. There were nights when she slept with her cheek against its flank, listening to a heart that beat without explanation. Those heartbeats stitched a new kind of map onto the old ache in her chest. She began to talk aloud in the dark. Not confession exactly, but the practice of naming things. Small humiliations, silly fears, the exact way grief tasted after 2 days of rain. The horse would breathe in the parts that needed it, and its patience had the gravity of a living altar. In exchange, she fed it slices of apple she kept wrapped in her pocket, tiny priests of sugar that said, "I am trying." The revelation arrived on a day that smelled of copper and old paper. They were in the lower glen, the place where fence posts leaned like a tired congregation. She had been scanning the ditch for something, anything to stake the animal's origin, a tag, a brand, a ribbon. The horse moved methodically, clearing brush with a nose that seemed particularly adept at finding lost things. It stopped at one post, circled it, and then pawed a shallow hole at its base. When it nudged the earth aside, there was a small rusted tin, verdigris tasting the edges. Her fingers were clumsy. The tin was heavier than she expected. Inside, folded tight like a secret, lay a scrap of paper. A name, a date, a slanted handwriting that looked like it had been written in a hand that forgot to be careful. The name matched the one that had been a house in her memory, a single syllable that had been both lullaby and command. Her vision constricted to the scratch of ink. She sat down on the damp earth and let the world tilt. She read the note 3 times as if repetition could steady meaning. It was not an explanation, not really. It was an apology and a map and a love letter all at once. A few spare lines promising care, a date when someone had planned to return but did not. The handwriting trembled the way a person trembles when they are trying to be brave for someone else. Her hands shook. The walls she had built felt like paper. The suddenness of all of it, the horse's insistence, the found paper, the slanted name, cracked something she had been pretending was solid. She had rehearsed composure so much that the first honest sorrow shocked her into a mess. Tears came not as a flood but as a series of small, undignified leaks. Dampness at the collarbone, salt on the lip, a tremor in the breath. She wept for the person in the note, for the life that had been arranged and then folded away, for the tiny private betrayals that make grief radioactive. The horse stayed. It did the simple, true thing animals do when humans break. It leaned close and let its breathing be a slow, steady metronome against her shoulder. It pressed its head into her lap and closed its eyes as if the act itself were a benediction. Its muzzle was warm and honest. The animal's presence was neither a cure nor a sermon. It was company provided without expectation. It would not soothe with words. It soothed by enduring, by being heavy and real where everything else had been airy and untrustworthy. She found herself telling the horse the story that had been a half-life for years. The phone call she had never wanted to answer, the suitcase hastily zipped, the boxes that arrived with too much of someone left inside. She spoke of small things that felt ridiculous to anyone else, a joke about a cardigan, the exact phrasing of a goodbye, and the horse listened with the soul clarity animals have. There was no judgment, only an attention so pure she felt compelled to be honest. Time shifted without fanfare. Weeks folded into a rhythm that neither evaded sorrow nor surrendered to it completely. Mornings began with the clop of hooves on the path and with the ritual of checking the tin in the hole, which she now kept by the hearth in a box lined with cloth. She cleaned the horse's mane and found, taped beneath the tail, a ribbon with the same faded colors as the handwriting. It was a small private archive of a life someone had once tended. Each find was an inch of clarity, a small angle from which the universe made sense. Her sleep changed. She woke more often with purpose instead of the blank, exhausted drift that had been her default. She laughed in small, absurd ways. Once she caught herself humming the kettle song that steadied the horse and felt like a secret handshake with the past. The relief was not dramatic. It did not erase the empty chair at the kitchen table or the habit of setting 2 plates. It was quieter, a loosening like an old shoelace finally unknotted. There came a morning when she realized she could take a breath that did not contain the shape of dread. The horse nudged her hand the way a friend might in a crowded room, nudging her back into the conversation of life. Together they walked to a place at the edge of the glen where the sun opened like a door. The weather was a simple, unremarkable mercy. Blue, no wind. The horse shied once at a rustle and then lived through it. She watched it unclench, and in that watching, something unclenched inside her too. On the ridge they paused. The view was a wide thing that held both the ruined fence and the neat roofs of the village. She lifted the tin and, without ceremony, slid the scrap of paper back into its shallow grave beneath the hawthorn. The act felt less like burying and more like returning something to its proper map. The horse stamped the earth 3 times as it had before, and then turned to her with an expression that could have been gratitude or quiet agreement. She had not expected a clear ending. Life does not usually offer endings tidy enough for the movies, but grief had shifted. It no longer sat at her elbow like a polite, malignant guest. It had become something she could navigate around, sometimes talk to, sometimes ignore, and not have it swallow her whole. The horse had been neither a miracle nor a magic trick. It had been steadying. That steadiness had been enough. They walked back down together, slow and companionable. As they reached the lane, she thought of how much of living required tiny acts of courage few people see. Answering the phone, washing a plate, turning a scrap of found paper into a story you could hold. The horse moved in rhythm with that truth. If this bit of the world had one last kindness to give, it was this. When she looked at the animal, she no longer saw only a reminder of loss. She saw a bearer of the small ordinary mercies that stitch a life back together. She turned, and as if by some mutual agreement, she hummed the kettle song and the horse lowered its head. A slow, human gesture of permission to continue. Sometimes the ones who carry you are not loud. Sometimes they are warm. Sometimes they stand beside you until the air rearranges itself enough that you can breathe again. If this story touched you, subscribe, comment, follow, and press bell icon to watch daily videos and enjoy.